The Cyberpunk Edgerunners collab in Wuthering Waves is one of the most highly anticipated collabs in gacha history, and I could not tell you how excited I am to finally get to play these characters and share them with you. So in today's video, I'm going to be going over both Lucy and Rebecca, the two brand new characters to Wuthering Waves from the Cyberpunk Edgerunner series, and I'm going to be going over everything that you guys need to know about them. My name is Braxophone, but you can call me Brax, and let's talk about Lucy and Rebecca. Okay, so I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys. I had like 48 hours to make 2 videos, so I'm just Adam smashing them together. Lucy and Rebecca both have brand new mechanics that are unique to their specific characters, and it makes them pair perfectly together. These characters were absolutely meant to be played as a duo, and for that reason, I can't think of any other way to do a video for them individually without honestly just wasting your guys' time. And speaking of time waste, I usually do go over every single character's unique kit and mechanics, but it's not even super worth it because even if I tell you everything that both of these characters do, probably only 10% of it's actually going to stick, and the other 90% automatically happens if you just do the right rotation. But I will give you a sort of basic rundown. Lucy's whole kit revolves around building up her forte, using her skills to inflict buffs and debuffs, and then once she has enough forte, she can do an enhanced skill here, literally whip out a gun, and then you build up a second forte gauge. Once this forte gauge is full, you can do another enhanced heavy attack sequence. It's actually a combo, so 2 heavy attacks in a row, and then you get to ult, and when you use this ult, you get a certain amount of RAM to spend. The RAM spent is shown on the right side. You can go ahead and just hold down left click if you want to just mark all the ones automatically, and you'll get all of the effects for all of those abilities. So this is what it looks like in practice. Double skill. You build up all of your basic attacks. If you had an intro skill, you'd have this faster. Once you can use your enhanced skill with your full forte circuit, you use that. And then you build up the next gauge with your new sequence of attacks. You use your heavy attack combo, and then you ult. You go ahead and activate all of these top 5 abilities, and they blow up. And that's it. And for style points, if you want to hold the Atom Smasher Echo, you can also activate the Sand Devastin, but it doesn't really do much. Showing you the rotation is going to be easier than trying to explain what literally all of this means. So, however, you probably should know what each one of these buffs does. It also reads it in the ultimate, so you don't actually have to read it here, but the top 5 buffs are actually useful. So the very first effect of her Resonance Separation is going to make it so that everyone gets marked. Then the second effect makes it so that marked enemies take 5% more damage. The third effect makes it so that marked enemies' defense is lowered. The fourth one is going to deal spectro damage to all marked targets, and the fifth one is going to deal hack damage to all marked targets and reduce their attack by 5%. The attack thing isn't really huge, but the hack damage is actually really interesting because that is a completely new type of damage. For all intents and purposes, hack damage is basically the same as Toon Rupture damage, except it's unaffected by literally every other source of Toon Rupture buffing in the game. Lucy's also able to apply Hack Interfered, which is essentially the same thing as all of the Toon Break mechanics, except it is specifically for the 2 Cyberpunk characters, and all of the effects are going to be specific to them. She will be able to consistently stagger targets with this, and she also has 2 passives that are very powerful in the right circumstances. Her first passive makes it so that if she doesn't take damage for 8 seconds while she's on field, she gets a stack of Optical Illusion, which basically nullifies 1 hit of damage dealt to her. So if you play her perfectly without taking any damage, she can actually handle a hit of damage during her rotation. The next one can be very powerful in specific game modes, but isn't always that good. It's an effect specifically for Lucy and Rebecca that's going to grant an all damage amplification and a hack damage multiplier. This can get up to 25%, and it lasts for 2 minutes and stacks 2 times. However, it requires you to defeat an enemy. So if you're against a boss, you're basically not really getting any benefit of this. But if you're in something like Whimpering Waste, it can actually be useful, and if you wail on these characters and get them to be super strong for the endgame mode that is a sequence of boss fights, it can also be useful there. But specifically for Whimpering Waste, this can be a good effect. Her outro skill grants a 25% basic attack damage amplification for 14 seconds or until the next character switches out, so Lucy technically can be used with other basic attacking units. However, the rest of this basically doesn't apply to them. This effect basically says if Rebecca inflicts hack shifting, she gets 20% to all damage amp, which is pretty cool. It also reduces their damage taken, but all in all, I mean, it's a whole lot of word vomit. It would be better to just teach you how they actually play. Now, Rebecca's a little bit different. She does have a little bit of flexibility in her teams, but it's not that significant. But her kit is also pretty cool. Basically, she has 2 different forms. She has a Huntress form and she has a Guts form. Now, her Huntress form is basically when she has 2 pistols. You can just sit here and do this forever. You guys remember when Chisha could do this for like a little bit of time? Yeah, well, she could just do it forever. But when she switches into her Guts form by using her skill, she then gets her shotgun shotgun, and it's a completely different attack string. Now, one really cool thing about Rebecca is that she actually has a unique dodge as well. So whenever you're shooting, if you dodge, you actually get a really cool unique animation that also does some damage. But in addition to that, in Guts form, you have a different dodge entirely. So it's just adding a lot of like personality to the characters, and I think it looks really cool. Now, there are two different kinds of attacks you can do based on the Huntress form or the Guts form. But overall, your goal with Rebecca is going to be to try and build up a little bit of this Forte gauge, then use her skill switch to Guts form, do your enhanced heavy attack once you are full Forte, then you're going to use a Resonance Liberation, and you can basically spam left click or R, or you could even just hold it down, I'm pretty sure, but I'm just spamming in case. You do have to aim a little bit or you will just miss, and that's how you play. Now, there's something to note about the Huntress form and the Guts form. The Huntress form is actually going to have a 30% crit damage buff, and the Guts form is going to have a defense ignore. Now, the cool thing with Rebecca is that if you do play her right in the correct rotation, you can actually get both of these effects up at the same time. So you'll get the 30% crit damage and the 15% defense ignore just by using her intro skill with 120 points of Hot Hand. Now, Hot Hand and her Forte circuit are both different. The Forte gauge that she's building that is the purple gauge that's currently empty, right, that I'm circling with my mouse here. And the Hot Hand gauge is the gauge that is slowly sinking right here down to 0. Now, this Hot Hand gauge will restore over time with about 10 points per second, and by using her heavy attack during her normal rotation, you'll get 40 points of it. In addition to that, there are some other buffs that Rebecca can give. For example, when she uses a Resonance Liberation, everyone in the party gets 20% attack buff, which is pretty good, and anyone that inflicts hack shifting gets their Toon Break boost increased by 30 for 30 seconds. In this way, this team is kind of similar to the Mornier-Lene team, where you'll get a bunch of Toon Ruptures for a bunch of damage, and you actually have your Toon Break boosted. A Toon Break with hack shifting is effectively going to do the same thing as Toon Rupture does. Rebecca does have some other benefits as well, namely that her outro skill is going to give up to a 50% all damage amp, but only to specific characters. So basically, she gives 15% all damage amp to the next character for 14 seconds, which is just pretty good overall. But essentially, you can get up to 35% heavy attack damage amplification over time, but it stacks up every 0.2 seconds with 0.5% damage amp. So by the end of this 14 seconds, you'll have it, but you're not going to get the full effect the entire time, unless you're playing Lucy, in which case you get max stacks and increase the damage multiplier of the turret that Rebecca puts out when she uses her outro. But again, it's probably easier if I just show you, so let's talk about the rotation real quick. When you're playing Lucy and Rebecca together, there's a couple things that you have to keep in mind for the rotation, and things actually do change between your first and second rotation, though it's not a ton. In this rotation example, I'm going to be using Mornier, but you can use Shorekeeper or Verena here. I'm not actually going to go into detail about Mornier's stuff, but if you want to see what that's like, you can check out my guide on her. Now, when you start this rotation, you actually want to lead with Lucy. Even though Lucy is going to be the buffed main DPS character on this team, she's going to start first because her ultimate will debuff the enemy. So we're immediately going to start with her Resonance Liberation, which is her ultimate, and we're going to activate all of the debuffs that we possibly can, including a defense shred, a vulnerability, and we're also going to dish out a little bit of damage. Then we're immediately going to go and swap to Mornier, and Mornier is going to take her field time, try to activate all of her buffs, and get her outro skill ready for Rebecca. When Rebecca is ready, we're going to go ahead and outro skill, use Rebecca's intro skill, and follow it up with 3 basic attacks. After the third basic, we're going to use her skill and follow it up with 2 more basic attacks. Now, these 2 basic attacks here are only going to need to be done on the first rotation, and the reason why is because it's going to give us slightly more concerto gauge. With that extra concerto gauge, we're going to be able to outro skill with her a little bit early to animation cancel her ultimate, save us a bunch of time, and also increase our overall team DPS. So we use those 2 basic attacks and then use our enhanced heavy attack. Then right before we use our Resonance Liberation, since we are using the Moonlit Cloud set here in this example, we're going to use Bellborn right before we activate it, and then we're going to use our Resonance Liberation. Within our Liberation, we're going to spam our basic attack as much as we can, although I'm pretty sure this thing is automatic, but just in case it's not, I'm going to do it anyways. Then when you leave that animation and start doing the big jump attack, you can immediately swap to Lucy, which I'm a little bit late on in this footage because you can do it even sooner than this. Once Lucy does her intro skill, you want to immediately use her skill twice. Around this time, the enemy will probably be Toon Broken if you're playing with Mornier, and you want to make sure that you do skill with Lucy twice before you do the Toon Break, because if you do the Toon Break before then, you don't get to take advantage of the buffs from Rebecca and Lucy's combo. So skill twice, and then I opt the Toon Break, but you don't have to Toon Break there. If you're going to, make sure you do it after the 2 skills. Then you need to get Lucy's Forte gauge completely full, so we're going to just do 3 basic attacks to fill it up, and then we're going to use her enhanced skill. Then we need to fill up her Forte gauge with another 4-string basic attack combo, then use her enhanced heavy attacks, followed up with her Resonance Liberation, activate all the debuffs and damage that we can, and as soon as that's done, we can pop Atom Smasher and immediately swap back to Mornier to start the second rotation. Now, the second rotation should fundamentally be about the same as the first, except this time we're just going to slightly change Rebecca's rotation. When she comes in after Mornier. So now that Rebecca's in, we're gonna go ahead and do 3 basic attacks. And since the fight calls for it, I am gonna tune break here, but you don't necessarily need to do it at this specific time. Either way, it should be 3 basic attacks into her skill. And because we're on the second rotation, 2 things happen. 1, we don't need to use 2 basic attacks because our concerto is already offset from the first rotation to allow us to swap out on her ultimate. And the second thing that's gonna happen is because we got the full hot gauge on her intro skill, we're able to get the 30% crit damage from Huntress and the 15% defense shred from Guts at the exact same time. After our 3 basics and skill, we're gonna go ahead and use her heavy attack, cutting out the 2 basics from before. And right before we use our Resonance Liberation, we're gonna activate Bellborn again. Then we're going to liberate all over them. And then during her jump up animation, you swap back to Lucy, double skill, then use basic attack so Forte is full, then use her enhanced skill, basic attack 4 more times, and lastly do a double heavy attack combo into a Resonance Liberation to debuff the enemy and completely blow them up, completing the tower in the second rotation. So that's basically how the rotation goes. If you want just a written out version to stare at, here is literally everything on screen right now. That is Lucy Resonance Liberation into Mornier's field time, then into Rebecca's intro skill, 3 basic attacks, skill, 2 basic attacks if it's the very first rotation, into her enhanced heavy attack, Bellborn into Resonance Liberation, bam basic attacks, and switch off on the final hit into Lucy. Lucy will intro skill, then use her skill twice, basic attack 3 times, use her skill, basic attack 4 times, 2 heavy attacks, and her Resonance Liberation, and back to Mornier. Trust me guys, there are so many buffs and debuffs to think about in this team, and you can just ignore literally all of them, so long as you follow this rotation correctly. Now, really quickly for the teams that are available to you, I mean, it's mostly just this, guys, but there's a couple of things to note. So Mornier actually could give you a ton of value in this team if they didn't invent an entirely new type of like tune break, tune strain thing. They could have just made it so that hack shifting and hack interfered were the same thing as tune shifting and tune interfered, but they did not. And thus, this effect from Mornier that should benefit you a ton with the interfered marker doesn't do anything because it's tune strain and tune rupture, but not just any sort of tune or hack related thing. I don't know. I'm just really bummed that this doesn't work, but everything else on Mornier works, and it is definitely worth running her. She is going to be the best support for these two, especially with the increase to the tune break rate, but you also can use other characters as well, like Shorekeeper, or if you have Verita and you're still using her in 2026, she also more or less fits the bill and buffs your team. Now, as far as other teams to put Lucy and Rebecca in specifically, Lucy is just kind of cooked. Like, I'm gonna be so for real, this character in most other teams is basically a downgrade all the time, with the exception of like maybe a character who is a basic attacker and Sanhua is like already used or something. Technically, there is a Yuno variant though that is like 10% worse if you don't want to play Rebecca for some reason, but Rebecca's free, so I don't know why you would do that. But Rebecca actually does have some other uses due to her attack buff and the ability to use the Moonlit Cloud set and damage amp your teammates. She works really well with Gian, Augusta, Peeb, but mostly she's just a better version of Mortefi. If you were using him in those teams previously, you can replace him with Rebecca, though Yuno will still be better. But Rebecca's free, so can't really complain too much. That's honestly basically it for teams. Sorry, guys. Now that I've talked about their teams, I might as well show you guys what kind of builds we're working with and looking for. Luckily, they have made the Cyberpunk builds a little, oh my God, look at that curve. That is crazy. So inflicting hack shifting on the target increases basic attack and heavy attack damage. This is basically just the Atom Smasher Echo, and it's made for Lucy and Rebecca. It literally says if equipped by Lucy and if equipped by Rebecca. So you are gonna want Atom Smasher on Lucy. So for the Lucy build, you can just run anything that's going to increase your Spectro damage. And that's why I recommend running just 2 of Spectro sets with Spectro, attack, and then a crit rate or crit damage main stat or cost Atom Smasher. The Atom Smasher Echo also grants you an extra 15% crit rate, which is really, really nice. But overall, anything that increases your Spectro damage is gonna be nice. You can also do plus attack sets, and that will also work for you. Crit rate, crit damage, energy regen, attack are all things that you're gonna want, although you don't need too much energy regen on Lucy. With the Rebecca team setup, you probably only need around 115%. So if you can just get energy regen on 2 or 3 of your Echoes, you'll be chilling. For Rebecca, I am using the Moonlit Cloud set, and the reason that I'm using this is because the damage that you're giving to Lucy actually outmatches and outpaces the damage that Rebecca's going to be doing in this team. Unless you have something like sequence nodes for Rebecca, in which case Rebecca's damage can actually be worth building for. Moonlit Cloud's energy regen bit, it doesn't actually matter that much, but the 5-piece set is really important because when you use your outro skill, it increases the attack of the next resonator by 22%. So that's gonna give Lucy an extra 22.5% attack, which on top of her normal buffs is going to already give you a total of 42.5% attack bonus, which is absolutely huge. The only issue with the Moonlit Cloud set is that you don't don't actually get to use the Heron, which does add even more damage to the upcoming character. And the reason you can't do this is because you want to animation cancel Rebecca. There are so many nuanced things that are specifically preventing this character from being normal at all. But Bellborn will still grant you a 10% damage bonus to Lucy, so it's not like all hope is lost. And for Rebecca, you do want to build her like a DPS like every other character in Wuthering Waves, with crit damage or crit rate on the main stat, electro damage on the 3 cost, and attack on the 1 cost. Before I forget though, you can still run the Atom Smasher setup. You can play this with a combo of 2/2 sets like Lingering Tunes and Void Thunder to get an electro damage bonus and to get an attack bonus, or you can even play the full 5-piece set of Pact of Neon Light Leap, which will increase the attack of Lucy coming in. Now, as for weapons, Spectral Trigger is going to be the best in slot for Lucy, and it is her signature. It does provide pretty solid value overall, but it's not like all hope is lost if you don't have it. Which, funny enough, a decent option for Lucy is Rebecca's weapon, so that's something to keep in mind. But Lucy's second best option is going to be Galbranda's weapon, mostly because it increases your heavy attack damage by amplifying it. And if that one doesn't work, you can use the other new standard banner weapon. I say new, but it's been out since 3.0, but this can give her a pretty big damage bonus. If you have the Battle Pass weapon Solar Flame, that is going to be probably her best 4-star option. And honestly, it does kind of suck because she doesn't have a ton of free-to-play friendly weapons, but as mentioned before, the Phasic Homogenizer is going to be a decent option for her if you can get that on the standard banner without spending on her weapon banner. Static Mist is of course a last resort, but you probably already have it if you've been playing WUWA for a while. For Rebecca, if you don't have her signature weapon, then using Linnea's weapon, if you have an extra one, can be useful. But if you don't have Linnea's weapon, Phasic Homogenizer is going to be the next best 5-star one that you can get on the standard banner, with Static Mist also being an option. Unfortunately, these characters are pretty niche in their teams, and they are pretty niche in their weapons. If you want some comparisons, feel free to check out these charts, but they are mostly 5-star focused, so keep that in mind. It's not going to be for everybody, but it can definitely be for anyone who has a standard 5-star pistol at least. Now, in this last bit of video, before I let you guys go, I want to talk about her sequences a little bit. I'm not going to go over every single one in depth because, to be honest, there are too many intricacies with all of their kits and all the synergies and things. I don't think it's super worth covering everything, truthfully. When looking at Lucy's sequences, you can see there's a pretty big increase on her S2, her S3, and her S6. And you'll actually notice that the lowest one for Lucy, aside from S5, which is a defensive sequence node, her S1 is actually the lowest gain. Now, this is something to keep in mind because a lot of people were looking forward to at least getting S1 of Lucy because you only have to go to 160 polls to get the extra copy. They're giving us a free copy at 160. But the thing you need to be aware of is that her S1 doesn't actually add a significant amount of damage because it just gives her an interruption immunity and a slight attack increase. While the attack increase is nice, it's not like a whole team damage increase or anything like that. And this one is mostly a quality of life sequence. The other thing this is going to do is make it so that if the enemy gets defeated, it applies the same effects from her ultimate to that next enemy. But realistically, I think this should have probably just been in her base kit. The S1 is not going to be that significant. If you really want to see her grow in power, you're going to want to get S2 and S3. S3 is the best value for low spenders that don't want to go all the way. S6, of course, is going to be absurd and ridiculous. It's going to make it so that enemies have a 40% heavy attack damage vulnerability from Lucy, which is already crazy. And in addition to that, you also do way more hack damage, which is going to be your tune break damage and also the extra damage that you can trigger with the rest of your kit. S4 is a support sequence. S5 is a shield. S3 is like a ton of damage multiplier increases, which is why it's so crazy. And S2 also has another giant damage multiplier increase. So that's why S2, S3, and S6 are so good. Now for Rebecca, I have like even worse news for you guys. So basically Rebecca's sequences just don't really I mean, they're worse off than Lucy's, right? Rebecca is a free character. You can pull sequences for her if you'd like, but the overall contribution of damage to the team is just not that high. If you look at S6 for her personal damage, it does increase it by a lot. So if you want to play Rebecca on field as a main DPS, getting her sequences can be pretty useful. S2 and S6 are going to be the main contributors of damage because S2 is going to give you 20% all type damage bonus for all of your resonators in the party. But in addition to that, you also get 15% all damage amp, which she can actually inflict this. So overall, that is going to stack up and add up in damage. S3 also good for her personal damage if you want to use her as a main DPS. It's just going to increase the multiplier of a Resonance Liberation, and it's a pretty significant increase, with S6 being the best one, obviously. And basically, whenever she uses her heavy attack, she does a very high scaling extra hit of damage. So that's pretty good. In addition to that, all of her basic attack damage bonus from from every source is increased by 40%, which, I mean, that's pretty crazy. In my personal opinion, if you guys are thinking about pulling for sequences on them, I mean, do as you please, do as you wish. I really don't think it's super worth going for sequences unless you're going for 2 or 3, and honestly 3 on both characters. For me personally, I'm gonna S6 them because I love Cyberpunk Edge Runners, but S1 is not going to be satisfying for you in the slightest. Anyways, that's basically my my full guide on Lucy and Rebecca. I hope that you guys found this helpful. It was a lot of yapping and a lot of information, but I don't think I could have made a different kind of video in less than like 48 hours, bro. This is crazy. Either way, I'm really excited for these characters, and if you guys are too, make sure to join me over on Twitch at twitch.tv/Braxophone when the collab drops, and I will be pulling S6 of both of the characters live. Let me know if you guys are pulling for copies of them as well. I'm really interested to see if you guys are enjoying the collab as much as I am and what you guys think. And I'll catch you guys next time.